and welcome into this week's book club episode of Star Wars Bloodline by Claudia Gray. If you are unfamiliar with the series, go ahead and click here and it will take you back to the beginning. But basically we're going through this book a couple of chapters at a time, getting into the nitty-gritty, and really engaging with the story. This week we are talking about chapters 16, I almost said episodes, chapters 16 and 17. We are a little over, really just at halfway through the book. Chapter number wise, not necessarily page number wise, and these were two very meaty chapters about some goings on. Chapter 16, we see that Leia was correct in her assumptions from the last two chapters, where she got to go to Ryloth. We get the character once again of emissary Yendor. Yendor is a character from Claudia Gray's first Star Wars novel, Lost Stars, and we also saw him a little bit in the Aftermath series, so it's kind of cool to see this familiar face. This is something that has been done really well in new canon, where they have brought in little characters like this who can pop up and exist in the different books, which is a great payoff for anybody who's been reading a lot of the books. But if you didn't know that Yendor was from other books, it doesn't necessarily detract from anything else going on, so it's nice in that way. One bit here where he and Leia interact, a nice little character moment. They're reminiscing about their time on Hoth. He comments about how much Tauntauns smelled. Leia says they weren't that bad, and then he makes a crack about, well, you didn't have to muck out their stalls, and Leia takes the joke quite well. What this does, this shows a very, very specific thing of their comfort level. So Yendor could have said this in a bitter way. He could have said this in a you think you're better than me, like, oh, you didn't think Tauntauns smelled bad? Well, it's because you never had to muck their stalls. You know, he could have said it like that, but instead it's this very jovial, like, oh, yeah, well, you didn't muck their stalls, and Leia's like, you know, that's true, and it shows this trust level between Leia and this former soldier under her, and that they already have this bond. That comes from that time. It tells a lot about Leia, that she's comfortable with somebody making a joke like that. It shows a lot about him, that he can make this joke in this warm manner. It was just a nice, cute little writing moment that can tell you a lot about these two characters in very little amount of time. It's during this conversation as well that Leia looks at Joff and Corey and realizes just how young they are, based off of how they're talking, and Leia realizes, you know, she was Corey's age, and at one point in the war, and when it was over, she was around Joff's age, and it made her realize how much she had gone through, and really what she's asking these young people to do now. So much of this book is little moments of Leia reflecting on her whole life, rather than spending large portions dwelling on it, rather than making that the actual, you know, plot or some kind of storyline within the book. It's something she's quietly visiting over and over again, which is a very realistic way of dealing with things, I think. Then they go to search Ryloth's archives. They're not finding much of anything. They're struggling because everything there is on paper or on parchment or on hide, animal hide. And this is because Ryloth has really struggled. It has largely remained an independent world, but even though it is an independent world, it's been largely manipulated and used by other planets. The Separatists try to take them. They never felt like the Republic ever helped them much, this sort of thing. And so part of writing everything down on paper was just simply not having the resources, and part of writing everything down on paper was a way of not having information deleted or stolen from them, making things a little bit more or making things a little bit more tactile. And this is told through Joff really not understanding. You know, Joff is that brash kid who's learning so much about himself, learning so much about the galaxy. He's bright, but he hasn't picked up on everything. And so this is explaining Ryloth's place on the galactic stage at this time, but through Joff learning things as well. What they do find is that Ren Riven has been funded by somebody who is very powerful. It's odd because everything seems to be tied to centrist worlds. Corey once again wonders if it could be a centrist plot. Leia is still not convinced that it is, but it is odd that so much of this is taking place on their world. And what's interesting to me in this question of, is this a centrist plot? Is this a populist plot? The senators aren't the leaders of planets. You know, each of these planets would have a leader in the same way, you know, my version of a senator as a U.S. citizen every state has 2 senators, but senators are not our governors, right? There's still a person who's in charge of my state, and then there is a senator who's a representative in Congress, and they're elected separately. So it's so odd to me that they're so entrenched in what galactic Congress is like that anything a senator would do is on behalf of that planet, and that anything the planet might do is on behalf of that senator. Because I could have a senator plotting something and no one's gonna go, oh man, the state of Michigan is trying to have a coup over the federal government. You know, they'd just be like, yo, that senator's doing something. In the same way, if my state was trying to have a coup, I don't necessarily know that a senator would know about it. Like, it's a different kind of relationship, and obviously we're states within one government. We're not different, like, functioning governments under an umbrella government, so it is a little bit different, but it's still kind of interesting to me that they haven't really considered that possibility, that it could be a plot of centrist worlds that isn't represented by centrist government, or vice versa, that centrist senators could be plotting something and the planets might not know anything about it, because that just kind of seems like a logical thing to me. But I think that's the kind of separation that Leia is trying to figure out, because all of these centrist worlds are involved. She's just trying to figure out if this is an individual case thing, or is this a big scale? They're trying to change galactic government because of it. Leia gets invited to a dinner. While that happens, Casterfo calls in and gets Joff, and then eventually Joff and Corey on the phone, and explains what Greer found at the end of the previous chapter, that there's this, it's not just like a couple of dozen people in a militia, that there's this giant army on the planet of Daxim 4, and he says that there's a satellite relay, and that they need to track these satellites. Joff could tell Leia about what Casterfo said, but instead decides that they need to act quickly. They are under orders from Casterfo, so it's fine. He then thinks of an even better plan, not just to tap into satellites one time, but to keep tapping into these satellites continuously. Corey and 3PO are not into this plan because Joff is thinking on his own. They go back and forth on this. 3PO eventually hacks into these satellites, being very 3PO about how he hacks into the satellites. They get it done, everything works out, everything's great. Leia comes back and she is upset that she's been left out of the loop. There's a couple different layers here. So Leia is upset with Joff and kind of telling him, you know, you shouldn't have done this, you should have involved me, but after all of that, then says, hey, it was a great idea. And I mean, Leia is somebody who's going to value independent thinking. Leia is certainly somebody who has changed orders on the fly herself, so she understands the value in it, but doesn't want to be left out of the loop. And I liked where she took it. Her ultimate point wasn't that what he did was right or wrong, or worked and didn't work. His point, or his problem, was that he's not thinking as a member of a team. He's thinking, I have this idea, I'm going to adapt the idea. Even when he tells Corey and 3PO, like, hey, put it all on me and I'll take all the blame, he's thinking that it would be that simple, that it would just fall on him and that nothing would come down on them. He's not thinking like a member of a team, and they have to be a member of a team. And this is big for him, both working with Senator Organa, but also big because he wants to be in a squadron, right? He's a fighter pilot, and he can't just go and do his own thing and not interact with his squadron. So here he's learning this very important lesson, and I like that from Leia, because it is hard to hear from Leia, oh, you shouldn't have done this kind of thing, because this is the type of thing, you know, what he did is something that Leia would do all the time. That wasn't the problem. The problem was he was just not including anyone else in what he was doing. This makes me think a lot about Leia's relationship with Poe in The Last Jedi. This book was not a part of the official lead-up, like it's not a Journey to the Last Jedi novel, but it was released in between the two films. So I don't know if this is something that Claudia Gray would have known was coming or not. She did receive some information about The Last Jedi, but not a whole lot, not to the extent that somebody writing a specific lead-in may have gotten. It made me think a lot about that. At the opening of The Last Jedi, Poe disobeys Leia's orders to try to take down the Dreadnought. And they do take down the Dreadnought, but at a great cost. And Leia is upset. Now, of course, that goes a little bit different because Poe's plan doesn't work out super... I mean, yeah, the Dreadnought gets destroyed, but he gets a lot of people killed. No one got hurt when Joff changed the plan. But there, Poe was not thinking like a part of a team. He was thinking about the goal and the goal only. And it's the same with Joff. Joff was thinking about his goal and the goal only, and not how it could impact the team, how he could get everybody in danger. And so I liked seeing that parallel of Leia, like, hey, I want to encourage this kind of behavior because this kind of behavior saved my life in the rebellion, but we need to be smart about this behavior. And it was nice seeing that parallel for me. Now we hit chapter 17. So 17, we're back to Casterfo. Casterfo is going to meet Hadrassian for getting the Royal Guard helmet. Greer still does not like the plan, but she's starting to respect Casterfo because he is choosing to go into danger and not acting like the spoiled, privileged brat that she still assumes that he is. He reaches the camp, tries on the helmet. It's cool because he talks about how much he can see, how you can see more in the helmet than you think you could, contrasting that to, Luke putting on the Stormtrooper helmet and going, oh, I can't see a thing in this helmet. A small thing. It's probably not an important thing, but I just thought that was a kind of a cool, not parallel, but compare and contrast, basically. At this point, Casterfo has to act zealous. He has to act like he's somebody who really, really likes the Empire, and specifically because it's an Imperial Guard helmet, somebody who would be really into the Emperor and to Vader, and he has to fake this zeal. He fakes this zeal by remembering how much he hates Darth Vader, and he can put that gleam in his eye and pretend that his gleam is about loving Vader instead of imagining killing Vader. This is still really interesting because at this point, short of Claudia Gray being an utterly deceptive writer with the narration, which I'm just going to tell you she's not. This is a point where you should just really, really trust Casterfo. Even if he thinks empires and authoritarian governments are cool, he's not somebody who likes the ethics of who Vader is. And so you can disagree with Casterfo and disagree with how he would run the galaxy, but he's not showing himself to be an evil person at the very least, which is a big part of his dynamic with Leia. His response works. He impresses Hadrassian, starts talking about weapons. Hadrassian's like, oh, here, let me show you these weapons, and they have these force pikes, and these force pikes are illegal. So she's showing him these weapons. He's playing dumb. He knows that this, the fact that they have these weapons is a big deal. And Hadrassian is testing him and has him get into a sparring match with one of the Amaxines. What I really liked about this is his dominant hand is his left hand. As a fellow lefty, I get really happy anytime there's somebody who's left-handed in something, because left-handed people are cool. Now, Greer is watching this all play out. She's got a holocam on Casterfo's bike so she can kind of see what's going on. She's about ready to fly in and help him, basically doing what he did to Leia earlier in the book, and then she trusts her gut and goes, he probably knows what he's doing. I might do more harm than good. I might go in and rescue him, but then we'll both be dead. I'm just gonna see what's up, and that ends up being the right call, because as it turns out, Casterfo is actually ridiculously good in a fight, both because of his survival instinct as a young kid, and just through large amounts of training. He completely controls the whole fight. He even describes how he doesn't have to win the fight all, just fighting at all, holding his own at all, is going to impress the Amaxines, and he's like, but I'm gonna win the fight anyway. And he does, and he completely beats this new guy, but somebody who's described as a more green recruit. His tactics just kind of outplay the other guy. They're supposed to go to the first blow. The first blow would be really painful. Casterfo is fighting with rage. Like, he's fighting with rage and anger and hate, which we as Star Wars fans are trying to recognize and be worried about. But he is able to control it and doesn't actually end up landing a blow on the guy, but ultimately ends up, stopping and earning a lot of respect from the Amaxines, and that's a really great point. At this point, he goes back to Greer, and they debrief and discover the planet Simbesco. Simbesco is the planet that Leia also discovers when she and Joff and Corey scan the satellites and the plan works. They find out about a planet. It's the same planet here that Casterfo and Greer are talking about, so we're seeing how everything's connecting, even though they don't know how everything's connecting. Greer pays Casterfo the high praise of, you fight like a man of Parmath, or Parmathi, or however you would say the name of her planet. This was a really good moment between them. You're really kind of seeing them bond, and she really respects him because he was in a fight. So basically this was a chapter of Casterfo just impressing absolutely everyone because he's really good in a fight. But I mean, it makes sense because Greer is from a planet of warriors. The fact that this is something he could do and he could fight in an intense way but an honorable way is a way where she could probably see the strength of his character. She, as a fighter, would understand what that looks like. Casterfo wants to tell Leia about what's going on, but there's some kind of radiation storm. For some reason, he's not able to get in touch with her, so he decides to call one of his centrist allies. He figures the centrists should know about this too. It shouldn't be just him. Eventually, all the parties are going to have to unite, and so he decides to call Lady Carisi, because he figures she owes him a little bit. His speech is part of the reason why her movement to get a first senator went through at all. So he calls her, and she's in the middle of her coronation. And it's a really funny moment because he calls her and she's like, "What are you doing? I'm about to go through the third rites of my coronation and stuff." And he has the thought of like, do I want to ask? I don't want to ask. And I like this idea that she's just talking to him about this as if he should totally know, and he totally doesn't. And she must just be so absurd all of the time for him to go, you know, whatever it is this time is just too much. So that was another really good just little beat. Like, what Gray is just so good at through this whole book is the little beats and the little beats and the little, and I loved it so much. But he tries to tell her about all of this, and she brushes it off. She's like, no, this isn't anything. This is a bunch of hicks with some shotguns and some moonshine. She doesn't think anything bad's going to come of it at all. Really, really downplaying it. And Casterfo's completely disheartened because he's seeing again the ineffectiveness of the Senate, right? The law and order and everything that's supposed to be happening from his party. You know, this is the party that's supposed to come together, not muck around and, you know, not wanting to overassert themselves or whatever. These are the people who are supposed to want to come together and just deal with what's going on in front of them. And his ally, who's supposed to help him the most because she even owes him a political favor, won't do anything for him. So he ends the chapter just completely deflated because she straight up says, like, don't even tell anyone else about this because what you're talking about is so embarrassing. So he's realizing all the more that his only true ally is Leia, and that's really where the chapter ends. These were a little bit more, well, his chapter was a little bit more action-packed. Both chapters were really more kind of laying groundwork for where things are going to go soon. You know, this is the point in any book where we're just kind of following the story along. I'm excited to get to where some of these chapters are going. Just knowing what's happening with all of the Amaxines and stuff, I think we're going to get to some really great stuff. But that's what I have to say about these chapters. Please let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. If you're not already, please follow us on all the socials. For next week, we're going to go ahead and read chapters 18 and 19. That's chapters 18 and 19. We're going to continue to read 2 chapters a week. Thank you so much for hanging out. I always appreciate it. And I will talk to you guys next week.